Okay, here we have a Roomba 980, and this one's a little bit trickier to get to all the fan motor and stuff in the back here. So we're assuming that you can do the easy things like take this off and clean that out and replace this brush, but the tricky part is getting back in here and cleaning all that out. So first off, it's easiest just to remove that from there, and you can come back and do the exciting things like pull out your dryer sheets and vacuum down in there. But getting to here is the part that you really want to get back and clean, because here's where it's creating the vacuum. And so cleaning back in there is the tricky part. There's several screws. Some of these are not terribly important which order you do it in, but you'll release different parts. So to start with, we're going to do the 3 screws here, and you may think that that's enough to get this part off, but it's not, and we'll show you why here in just a second. Okay, so now if you try and lift this up, you'll notice that this side lifts up just fine and dandy, and that's easy enough to do, but it's caught over on this other side. And so you think, well, maybe there's a screw. It's tempting to try and take these screws out, but you don't really want to take those screws out. What is hiding is under this sticker here. And so, yeah, it's most helpful to get something that you can pry under the sticker with. And you could try to rescue this sticker, but frankly all it says is that you shouldn't throw away electronics into the garbage, which is true of all electronics, not just this. So just go ahead and yank that whole sticker off. You'll eventually want to come back with Goo Gone or isopropanol and clean that off so that the sticky doesn't keep picking up all the stuff that it's vacuuming. But you don't really need the sticker anymore. And you'll notice now there's 2 more screws on there that you'll want to take off in order to pull this apart. Now all these screws are the same size that we've taken out so far, so you can just put them all together in one pile and it's not a problem. Now that you've gotten those 2 hidden screws out, this lifts up pretty easily. Except that you'll notice that when you're trying to pull up here, it's caught on something. Okay? One of these is really easy to pull out. It's just a simple loop here, and I'll show you it once it's off. The other one is a little trickier to get out because it's got some little tabs on it. So if you look at the front here, you can see there's a little tiny lever arm that's in a slot. To get that out, you're going to basically torque this around. You have to get above on this side and twist it around. So you're going to bring it around a little bit and then basically twist it at 90 degrees to pull it off that lever arm. Your filter at this point will fall out, and you hopefully have a replacement filter if you're getting to this point. Ours is somewhere. Not sure where. And you can see we forgot to empty it beforehand, but that's okay. We'll dump that in the garbage here in a second. What was grabbing on were these little 2 arms here, and so this one locks into the hole here, and that one's fairly easy to get out. The harder one has some notches on it on this arm here, and that goes into the slot, and so that one is the one that you're going to turn sideways to get it out. You may have seen this little piece. It falls out at the same time. When we put it back together, we'll put that in after we get this all notched together. And that just is a little flap that goes in right here. And you can see when it's down, facing down, gravity pulls it this way. When the vacuum's on, it pulls it this way. And so it can get to the motor there. All right, I'm going to go empty the bin here. So set aside this little flappy piece. Don't forget about it. I put it all back together at one point and forgot about it. Now, the tricky part here is you can get to a lot of stuff here and vacuum all of this out and get to most of it. If you think that there's more clog going on in the vents here that you really need to get to, you're going to have to take apart this little scissor jack arm thing. In general, I would say try to clean out as much as you possibly can without doing this, but every now and again you probably want to take this apart. And I haven't figured out a good way to keep this together. It's the trickiest thing to put back together. You'll notice that the screws are silver, and that's sort of like an indication of danger, because they're different screws, and it's harder to get this assembly all back together. There's a couple screws here on this side, but that won't lift all of this apart entirely because these two screws go all the way through, and you can see the terminal screw things here, and then there's a couple screws that you can see the terminal part on this red side too. And so you can see there's a black screw there and a black screw here, but these silver screws are really the tricky ones. So when you take the silver screws out, you're going to think, I tried various ways of keeping these screws in. I wasn't really that successful. You may be more successful if you can just get these loose without bringing them all the way out and keep that scissor part together. That's helpful, but I'm going to go ahead and take it all the way apart so I can show you how to get it back together, because inevitably you'll probably lose it at least the first time through. So you can see as soon as I loosened that one, it falls apart into a couple pieces. There's this little U-shaped thing with the silver screw. You can take the silver screw all the way out, it doesn't matter. And then on the other side is also the exact same piece, and those two pieces are identical, so you don't need to worry about keeping track of which one goes on the left and which one goes on the right. They are exactly the same. This little scissor jack is two pieces, and so it can come apart, easy to put back together. It has these two little things on the bottom of part that actually fit together as in that spring and keep that spring locked in place. So it is important when you put it back together to get those little pieces together. And then other than that, it's pretty similar, and as long as you get that part in the right place, you'll be able to get it mostly back together. You do want, there's only one notch on this back arm. It's a little tiny, tiny plastic notch, whereas this one has two, and the two goes in the front side and the one notch in the back side. But the bottom parts are identical. These bottom little lever parts of the lever arm are identical. So you do want to kind of set that aside in that configuration and keep that separate. Okay. So those two silver screws are different, so definitely keep those separate. But then these screws are the same as some of the other ones that you've taken out. And these two that I'm taking out right now are the easiest ones to forget to put back in because they're super hidden. And this is where having a long screwdriver does make a difference, as well as on the other side. And having a slightly magnetic screwdriver really helps too. And having somebody else there to hold it for leverage really helps too. So if you don't have two people, you can just use some things to help keep it in place while you unscrew it, because otherwise it will tend to swing around. But again, these are the same size as screws you've already taken out, so you can just put them in your same pile there. It's fine. And then turn it over, and these deep pockets here also have screws. And again, still the same size screw, so it doesn't matter if you keep these separate from your other pile. Okay, now we can take this assembly off. It won't come all the way apart because this, like you can't really get this motor all the way apart. There are some additional screws that you can take this motor a little bit apart, but we took it apart and we couldn't really access that much more. But you can see there's a nice layer of dust here now that we can get rid of and vacuum up and really clean all of this out, and that will help the new filter we put in perform a little bit better. You may also, since you're taking it apart this far, want to go ahead and use a wet wipe of some kind to help wipe down some of the surfaces. And in some of the little tiny areas, you can use some rubbing alcohol and Q-tips to just get into those little crevices, clean it all the way out so that everything's nice and as if it were new. So just dip your Q-tip in there, and then you can get into some of these little tiny areas. Rubbing alcohol is a great solvent to use. It generally doesn't hurt any of plastics, but if you use alcohol, that also can work. It's a little bit stronger of a solvent, so it may damage a few more things, but rubbing alcohol is generally really safe. You don't want to use acetone in here. There's a lot of different kinds of plastics in here, and some of them may not do well with acetone, so. Alright, once you have all your parts pretty well cleaned up, then you can see it looks a lot better. Everything's all nice and shiny like it's brand new. So you probably ran into this part falling off of the part here. It was
right in there.
Right in here. Yeah, that's right, yeah. One of the things to watch out for when this part falls off is when you assemble it back together, this little rubber part can get crammed in and going the wrong direction when you reassemble everything. So we'll take a look at that. But if you try to flip it over, it won't go together right, and you'll realize that, hey, the curved part doesn't fit together. So flip it over, curved part goes back in just fine. So it's pretty much impossible to put together wrong on that part. Okay, so you can put that part back together in there, and then start assembling everything back in how it should be. So again, here is the big part that you want to put together and start thinking about how does that go together, and then this part is the part that has the little scissor arm. Okay, so we're going to put this scissor arm thing back together, and so we'll get back to that part in a little bit. There. So the scissor arm, you can see this is where the spring goes here, and the spring has a big side and a small side. The big side fits nicely in that little spot, so it's actually pretty difficult for it to not go in the right way, so that's convenient. These little U-shaped pieces are what are going to keep the scissor arm together. Okay? So again, the scissor arm, when you put it together, it only goes together pretty much one way, especially if you get those little pieces sticking out of the bar in the middle going the same direction. You can't screw that up too badly. So if you put it together and you end up with the sticky out parts going opposite directions, just take it apart, put it back together with those going the same direction, and you're good to go with that. Then that's the part that's going to be pointing down toward the spring, and then front and back, you know which way is front and back because you want the upper arm that has the two nodules on that going toward the front, and the one that has only one going toward the back where the vents are versus the front of the vacuum. So this is how it's going to sit in there. And so we're going to put this together, and again here it's useful to have a second person here to hold this down. Now before we press down on these two pieces, again, it doesn't matter that these two pieces, if you mix these up because they're identical to each other, they're going to sit over the bottom part of this. And so you can see that it fits over this and that allows it to slide. But importantly on this little piece, there's this little tongue that's going to fit under a flap here. And then this is where the screw goes in. So what we're going to want to do is be able to slide this into the tongue part and then latch down over that. Okay. So, and this gets a little tricky. You have to have it open a little bit for it to go over that. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to slide it into that. There's a little notch toward the spring side that I'm going to put it in first. And then I'm going to put that over that part and try and keep it all together. It's a little bit of trial and error here, but I found that putting the tongue in first and then lining that up works. And then I'm going to do the other side before I start getting everything all together. And most of the time it takes a couple of iterations to make it all work out here. So I lost that other side while I was fiddling around here. Okay, so in anticipation of me actually being successful this time, I'm keeping a little bit of pressure on this side so that I don't lose that one. And then I'm opening it up on this side a little bit so that I can put this over the top there. Get my thing in there. And now I think I'm on, oh, nope, not quite. Almost on both of these. Okay, so now I think I have both of these in place. I'm going to have, oh, almost.
Something clicked over
I think it did. Now, if you have a flathead screwdriver, you can usually come in and finagle this. I lost my tab on one side, so I'm just going to come in and use my flathead screwdriver to just sort of help me get that tab back in place, because it's a skinnier finger than my own finger. There we go. And so now it's easier to put the screws in when the spring's compressed, but you don't usually have free hands. And so having someone just press down on that while you get those screws lined up and in place is extremely helpful. There's a lot of play in here, so don't assume that just because you're over the thing that you're in the right place for the screw. You want to keep an eye on where is that hole and get that lined up before you start trying to screw it in place. So, there we go. And you'll know you've hit the hole because you will go basically all the way through. Now, it's tempting to just sort of push that all the way through, but that's not going to be very helpful until you put the piece back on the back there. But it will be helpful to get the screw. It will be helpful to get the screw in place. So, getting all your tabs in place. Come on, tab buddy. You can do it. Oh. There's mine. And this is why, exactly why, you don't necessarily want to take this all the way apart every time. This assembly here of this scissor is the most tricky part. So, we're going to, I should bring that screw back out again. Slide this piece in there. Into the tab. Lost If you get frustrated by this, take a break and head on out for a break and come back and reassemble, because it does take a little bit of patience to get everything lined up for this. So it helps to have it right side up, which is the U goes over the top, not mashes into the top. So that side popped up again, but I'm going to go ahead and latch this side down because this side is giving me problems this time. So I'm going to just stick that screw through. And try to get it in its hole a little bit. And then come back to this side where there's a little bit more play. There we go. And it does take quite a bit of fiddling to get that around. Now, the other one is actually relatively easy now that you have that one in. And once it's in, it doesn't really want to come out, so you don't have to like worry deeply about your other fiddling getting that one out, because unless you're really out of luck, it will stay in there. Then the other one, just line up the hole, and it pretty much just pops on without any problem. And then you can line everything else up. But before you get this all snapped together, remember the little plastic piece, open it up, put that little flap down, and it's going to sit nicely and smoothly in there. Make sure that's all nice and smooth, and then you can line everything up for putting that in. Now, it's not going to sit very well right now because we need to put the filter back in. And so make sure you're still all lined up, you haven't lost your little flappy part. You get your filter put back in, switch it that way. And I think, there we go. Then I think we're all pretty well lined up here. I think I got something slightly off here. Oh, I know why. It's that metal tab that I didn't push all the way in, and then my little plastic piece fell out of place. So get your filter in place, get your little plastic piece in place, make sure those are nice and flush, and then you should be all good to go. And then everything is nice and in place. And so if anything isn't going back together smoothly at this point, you've probably got something out of alignment. So don't try to cram it, just figure out what's out of alignment and get that back into alignment. And then you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws for this side, and then 2 screws left over for this side. At this point, if you have more than just those 7 screws, you forgot to do the screws underneath this plate back here. So go in and put those back in before you do these screws, so you don't have to take as many screws apart. All right, so should be pretty straightforward from this point to get all those screws back together, but getting that little scissor jack in place and the scissor arms back together are the tricky part. Worth doing every once in a while. Obviously, you don't need to clean this all out every single time you replace your filter, but especially if your performance of your Roomba is not what you're used to, go ahead and open this all up and see that it doesn't have a clog of something somewhere in those parts.